Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Inspired Online. I'm Shay Ali here with you today with Justice Alnashir Visram. He joins us all the way from Kenya. So thank you so much for joining us today. So a lot of my group probably haven't heard of you before, so I'll say a little bit about what he does. He's a Court of Appeal judge in Kenya. And the Court of Appeal in Kenya is the highest court of the land, so it's certainly a very eminent position. I've had the pleasure of working with him on various mediation courses around the world. And I have to say, he's just incredible at the sense of presence, the sense of fairness, the sense of doing the right thing that he encourages in everybody that he comes across, and does it in such a humble and wonderful way, which is why I wanted to share him with the audience today and to see what his words of wisdom would be. He has also recently been appointed by the President, His Excellency, the President of Kenya, to investigate misconduct in the tribunals. So certainly a very important role there. And he's been promoting the use of mediation, having trained as a mediation trainer. He's very, very passionate about the use of mediation across Kenya, so has been very actively involved in making sure that that happens as well. And I think really doing your bit for spreading world peace, which is just phenomenal. So thank you for joining me today. Welcome to Inspired Online. And I'm going to start a little bit unusually today. I usually ask straight for the wisdom, but I want to ask for this first. What is it that's inspired you, and what, tell us about your career for the last 20 years, because it's been such a phenomenal career.
Thank you, Sheila, for those kind words. I'm not sure I deserve all of them, but I'm really pleased to have this conversation with you and to share some of my thoughts about my career and the inspiration that I've drawn from the work that I've done. I've been in dispute resolution for the last 46 years, 26, the first 26 as an advocate of the High Court, and the last 20 years as a judge in the judiciary of Kenya. Of those 20 years, I spent the first 8 years as a judge of the High Court, and the last 12 years as a judge of the Court of Appeal.
Wow.
And so you might say, I've seen it all.
You have more than most of us, I think.
I think I may have come across almost every kind of case that you might conceive on almost every subject. And so I have a landscape of everything that happens in the judicial system. And I have witnessed firsthand the difficulty that people have in dealing and coming face to face with the court of law. Mm-hmm. Because first of all, it is very intimidating. Of course, it's very expensive, it's very time consuming, and most important, it's so totally unpredictable. Mm-hmm. So two litigants might come to the court of law, as you know, and there is only a 50% chance that you will win. One party has to win, the other party has to lose. And for the loser, it may be a very devastating thing in his life, because he might lose all his property, he might lose his family, he might lose everything that he has built for. And even if he wins, he will never be able to reestablish the family relationships or the relationship with the other litigant almost forever. Mm-hmm. And so, given that a court of law is not quite the place, in my humble opinion, after 20 years in the judiciary, what is the alternative? Mm-hmm. And I have therefore always advocated, even as a judge sitting in a court of law, that people who have a dispute should first try mediation. Mm-hmm. Now, there are many forms of alternate dispute resolution that people can engage into, but the two most common are arbitration and mediation. I won't go into details of all of them because we have so much to talk about and so little time. But I want to focus essentially on mediation and to give a brief understanding of what mediation is, and to then explain the process with personal examples that I've encountered in my work as a mediator, and try and have people understand why mediation is so inspiring in any dispute resolution. So first of all, mediation essentially a dispute between two parties that is referred to a neutral third party to help them arrive at that decision. The most important issue here to understand is that the third party neutral is not actually making a decision.
They're very different from your career.
Absolutely, that was completely different, because I'm used to sitting on the bench and looking at two litigants in a very cold-hearted manner, even if I don't want to be cold, make a decision based on evidence before me and the law applicable to that evidence. I don't have a choice, because essentially I'm not a court of mercy, court of justice, and I follow the legal principles, however hurting it might be, however damaging to any one party. And I will feel sad and I will really regret it and I will lose some sleep over it, but I don't really have a choice. And that's why I think mediation is to go. And it's a way to go because the two parties are making their own decision. There is a judge, the mediator is not an arbitrator, it's not a decision maker. And the biggest advantage of this the decision. You will not have to send auctioneers to collect on the debt that you're fighting for, because you and you will honor the decision. There is a lot of process will be honored, accepted, and executed, so nobody will have to force anybody to do their part. The second most important thing that happens is that the parties to a dispute in a mediation will certainly in their relationship. If it is family, your family relationship will be maintained. If it's a business relationship, if it's an employment relationship, whoever the party is on the other side, you will go home happy. You will be able to meet on the street and say hello to each other, not having a knife that you want to wait to stick into that person's back. That will never happen, because you're now friends. You may not get everything you want, as in a court of law, because in a court of law, it's a zero-sum adversarial system. You win or you lose. But in a mediation, you may not get everything you want, but you certainly will get something or the other. But you will certainly get happiness in making sure that you've resolved your dispute happily. And you're going to, one of the principles that in my own community that we use in mediation is our attempt to bandage the wounds. Because when two parties come to you for mediation, already they are wounded, already they are really many issues. And mediation is a way to bandage their wounds and to let them go out of mediation in a happy way, unlike in a court of law. Also, mediation is very inexpensive. That you pay to anybody other than the mediator, if it's a commercial mediation or it's a mediation that you've engaged to pay for. In my community, we do many mediations and we don't charge. It's all pro bono. We do not charge parties for any mediation. So it's the greatest opportunity for people who have disputes to go to and have their disputes resolved through a process of mediation. It is a very confidential process. It is voluntary. Nobody forces you into it. The court doesn't force you into bringing any witnesses, and it's on a without prejudice basis, meaning that if for any reason the dispute has not been resolved in a mediation and a party has to go to the court, nothing said or done in a mediation can be introduced as evidence in a court of law. And that is a universal principle applicable to every mediation in any part of the world. And the idea is to encourage people to speak openly and freely and to make offers and accept offers and things like that. So having made an offer in a mediation, the other party can't later go to the court and say, but you already offered me $100,000, so why are you disputing it now? Everything said and done in a mediation is confidential, is said without prejudice, on a without prejudice basis. And the idea is that everything stays here and you resolve on the basis of what you've said and heard here. And once you leave the room, nobody talks about it. The mediator himself is under oath not to disclose any of those things first.
So, and hence why the passion for mediation, you know, there's, and as I said, you're doing your bit here to spread world peace in a way, in really promoting this. So can you tell us a little bit about what you've done in Kenya to promote this idea? Because certainly in England, it's become mandatory in some aspects to mediate first before you go running to your local judge, but not all. And so what have you done in Kenya to make sure that this happens?
So over the last 10 years, mediation is a new concept in Kenya. A new meaning has been introduced in the country only about 10 years ago.
Wow.
We're among the last of the countries that have embraced mediation officially in the court system. So we started this effort 10 years ago, and I've been on that pioneering committee from the very beginning. What has happened and the difficulties that we've encountered, especially from our most important segment of the judicial system, and those are the lawyers, the advocates. I think they were the most not to want to embrace mediation, because to them ADR was alarming drop in revenue. They thought that they will lose all the revenue they earned from a client who they took to the court. But it is beginning to gain momentum. And 5 years ago, we were able to change the rules and the laws that are applicable to dispute resolution to introduce mandatory mediation, as you have in the UK and as we have in Canada and other parts of the world. So now, at least in the family division and the commercial division, and very soon in all the divisions, mediation will become compulsory, meaning that if you haven't attempted a mediation, the judge will not hear you. And there must be a certificate filed by a mediator that this dispute is not resolvable in mediation. Only then it can go to a judge.
Wow.
At least half of the cases we're beginning to see are resolved in the process, through the process of mediation. And people are embracing mediation. I was honored to be the first chair of the Mediation Accreditation Committee in Kenya. And what that means is that before we grant accreditation to a mediator, meaning that he officially becomes a mediator in our judicial system, he has to go through a course in mediation that is recognized. He has to have had done some practical mediations, and he has to have credentials. When I say he, I mean she also. So yes. I don't want gender bias, but they all have to achieve a certain standard before we give them the certificate. It is extremely a good part of our judicial system. It is gaining momentum. The advocates are also finding that their own clients want mediation, and the people, the public, through a lot of education and a lot of um, seminars and workshops and all kinds of ways to convey what really a mediation entails, the people are beginning to prefer mediation. Because people often ask me, so how different is a mediation from litigation? And other than the definition and the advantages and disadvantages that are outlined before, the most important thing that appeals to the people is that for the first time in a mediation, they have their day and their story is heard, and a mediator is extremely patient to hear the story, to decipher, to discern what exactly is the interest of the party, which a court of law will never do. The court of law is not interested in how you feel, what you want, and what your real interest is. A court of law is simply interested in what's the evidence before me and what's the law. Here, it's very different. And I want to illustrate it with a little story because majority of the, to explain to them the major difference between interest and rights. What is your right? What is your interest? So when two parties come to the court of law, both will be disputing on what they believe are their rights and how those rights have been infringed by the party. In a mediation, it is not about rights that we focus on. We focus on what is your real interest. What do you really want? It doesn't matter what your right is. And yes, you may have a right, but will that right and exerting that right bring you the happiness you're looking for? What do you really want is the major question we ask ourselves in a mediation. And I'll tell you a little story, which story doesn't belong to me, by the way. I don't have any proprietary rights, but it's a textbook story about two little girls and an orange. There is only one orange in the kitchen, and early in the morning, the little girl comes to the kitchen, grabs the orange, and is about to slice it to make some juice. The big girl follows her and looks at what is about to happen and starts screaming, "Hey, it's my orange. I bought it with my money." And the little girl says, "But it was in the kitchen. Everything in the kitchen is common property, and now I've got it, so it's mine." So both of them are.
Oh, we've lost Alnashir. Hopefully he'll be back in a minute.
Sorry, can you hear me? I think I lost you for a minute.
We lost you for the mid-orange story. The little girls are fighting in the kitchen over the orange.
In the kitchen, yes. So both are trying to exert their rights. The little girl says, "I found it." The big girl says, "I bought it." So those are the rights. And in the meantime, as they're screaming, the mother comes down and says, "What is going on?" And both the girls exert their rights. And the mother is in a hurry to go to work, and so wants to resolve the dispute right there. And what does a normal mother do?
Cut the orange in half.
Exactly, slice the orange into half and give both of them one half of the orange. And when she does exactly that, as I think I would have done that too if I was not a mediator, both the girls start crying, and each of them dump their half piece of orange into the bin.
Oh no.
The mother can't understand this, and later on, the mother really asks a mediator, "What should I have done?" And when she does what she was told to do, she finds out that the little girl wanted the orange to make some juice. She was interested in the pulp.
Yes.
And the big girl simply wanted the peel, the skin of the orange for a cooking class at school. If the mother knew, both would have been very happy if the mother explored not what your right is, but what your interest is. Your interest is in the pulp, your interest is in the skin or in the peel of the orange, and both of you are very happy. So that is a good example to understand what is the difference between a right and an interest. And I have a very interesting personal story to tell, the true story of a mediation that I did here in Kenya. 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And this story illustrates exactly what a mediation is all about and how litigation would have never resolved that kind of a dispute.
Hmm.
So here is a story of a father and a son. The father, through hard work all his life, had accumulated a lot of property and a thriving business in a small town.
Hmm.
He was doing extremely well. When the son came of age, 19, the son for further studies in Canada. The son went to McGill University, studied business administration, and 3 or 4 years later came back to Kenya. The father was very happy to receive him. Father said, why don't you now take over the business under my tutelage? And after a few months or years, this is all yours to run.
Mm.
So the son is a very intelligent person, but quite a brat, who arrogant, who was a gift to mankind, who was disrespectful to everybody except to his parents.
Mm.
And he felt he had reason to be arrogant because now he owned a very intelligent. So in about 2 years, he was able to quadruple the business that the father had built.
Wow.
And he was able to increase the portfolio, the property portfolio 2 times over.
Wow.
That property, I think. So now the dispute happened when one day the son walked into the home and said, Dad, I need to construct an apartment building on this land where they lived. It's an old house. And the father said, never, because this house was built by my father. I was born here, you were born here, and your little son was also born here. And this house has a lot of sentimental value to me. It's never going to be demolished. The son said, but it's an old house. And this land is prime, it's valuable. We will make a lot of money building an apartment block on this site, and it's so huge we could build up to between 50 and 100 units on this land. What you're losing out on. And the father said, no. It's a long story. So the father said, over my dead body.
Wow.
I'm not getting rid of this house. You can do what you want. And the dispute ended up in court. And both the lawyers of both the parties agreed that the best way perhaps to resolve it is to divide the properties half and half. The father said, I'm okay with that, but this house is staying with me. The son said, I'm okay with that, but that house is. That particular house was the center of the dispute, and they simply couldn't resolve it. So the father said, divide the into half and half. It's okay. I'll stay up and rent, half the rent. And if they had done that, they would have lost a lot of money because that was the period when the entire global economy was in a major depression. Same in Kenya.
Yes.
If they had sold the property at that time to divide it half and half, they would have sold it for only 30% of the value of the actual value of the properties. So it was going to be, I was called in to mediate.
Yeah.
So that I could try and find a way to get them resolved. Hours and hours of mediation, and both parties were so adamant and we simply couldn't find a resolution for them until one day, listening to the father. And in mediation, you have to have your antennas open, active listening. You have to understand their communication, both verbal and nonverbal, and you're very good at nonverbal communication. So you would understand what I mean by really understanding what the parties wanted, and in particular, what the son wanted. And so in one of those long conversations with the father, I realized that the father really was looking for some kind of an acknowledgement, because he made statements like, this boy has no respect for me. This boy doesn't understand that I'm the one who built this up, even though he quadruple the business, double the apartment portfolio. But if it wasn't for me, he'd be nowhere. And I find it very disrespectful. At that time, I thought I had the answer as to what his real interest was. Remember, not the right, but the interest.
Yes.
And so I went back to the son and I said, look, you have a 3-year-old son. His son was 3 years old. And one day in 15 years' time or 16 years' time, I'm sure you will want to send him to McGill University or whatever university of your justice. Absolutely, I want him to go to McGill, do the same thing I've done. And I said, he will come back at age 23. And when he comes back, don't you think he might ask you, Dad, with all these properties, with this business, what happened to it? How would you wish to respond to that question at that time? And he really went into deep thought. And he said, you're right. I asked him, how would you explain it to your son that all this huge portfolio was squandered because you couldn't agree on one house where you were born and where he was also born? So he said, I think you're right. I said, all right. Would you like now to sit down with your father face to face and acknowledge to him, maybe even apologize to him for what has happened, and you want to put... He accepted that.
Wow.
We brought him into a meeting to apologize. And of course, I had to coach him on the notion of an apology, because an apology can backfire if you're not sincere. And I told him that he really has to believe in the apology, be sincere, have eye contact, and show that you mean it. You really mean this. And having understood what a real apology is all about, he sat down in front of the father and he said, Father, this should have never happened. I do not want to continue with this dispute. One who brought this thing for us, and you decide what you want, but I am really sorry. I shouldn't have done this at all.
Wow.
At that time, there was pin drop silence, and those 30 or 45 seconds were probably my longest seconds in a mediation. I was just absolutely not sure what's going to happen. So the father looked him in his eyes and he said, son, I did all of this for you. At my age, what do I want? Everything. You can have everything except the house. Keep all the properties. I don't need it.
Yeah.
Tears in his eyes. There were tears in the son's eyes. And that issue was resolved. And I always said, that is the power of the apology.
Wow.
A court of law would have never thought about an apology. And apologies don't resolve disputes in a court of law. Things can happen only in a mediation.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I mean, there's lots really for people to take away here, even for those that aren't in a legal dispute. We've talked about, you know, digging deeper into maybe even your children's desires. You know, what is it that they want to avoid conflicts in homes? We've talked about the power of apology and, you know, how to make it a good, heartfelt, sincere apology, and how that can really dissolve years worth of dispute as well. So I think even for those of us that are not in a court of law right now, there's lots of really useful nuggets that we can take away and, you know, use in our own lives. So, you know, now I will ask you the question that I usually start with, and we've had an insight into this already, but if you had to really share your wisdom with the world in a nutshell, what would you tell us?
Well, I know we're running short of time. So in 46 years of my career, more particularly in the last 20 years, I've come to recognize that for everyone wanting success in life, there are certain things that are so fundamentally important. And I think those are the ethics by which I live, and I think the ethics by which every successful person becomes successful. And some of those are really honesty, integrity, compassion, humility, and most important, hard work. I think hard work and working smart and working hard is absolutely a must. And I have really worked hard in my life. And I think there is no replacement to hard work. And I don't know of anybody who died of hard work.
No, that's true.
Hopefully, everybody listening to me will embrace this notion of smart and hard work, which I believe is the key to success. Having a legacy in your mind, working towards a legacy is also extremely important to me, and I'm sure to everybody else. What do you really want to be remembered for? And I want to be remembered for the things I did to make other people's lives better, the change I was able to bring in other people. And that goes, and I've done that almost all my life, in a way to teach students, to have interns, to train mediators. And as you know, with my community, I've trained 400 mediators around the world, together with a group of other trainers. So I find that very successful, and I find that others can perhaps follow in that example and try and make lives better for other people, because those other people will remember you when you're not around.
Absolutely. Now, I usually ask at the end if any of the audience would like to get in touch. How would you do that? Unlike a lot of our speakers, you're not necessarily promoting services or anything like that, but if they would like to connect with you or find out a bit more about what you are doing, are you open to that? And if so,
Yeah.
can you get in touch?
Absolutely. You're at liberty to share my email address. You're at liberty to share my WhatsApp address.
Okay.
Best as I can to respond to any queries that they might have.
All right. Well, we'll post that well, I'll post the email address, so we don't want you to be bombarded with phone calls necessarily. Yes. But we'll post an email address that's most comfortable for you with the, where it gets promoted. Thank you so much for your time.
And thank you, Sheila, for having me over. And I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.